close friendship with another human being, there will always be moments where we do not live according to the best in us. We always have shortcomings, perhaps even broken promises, perhaps hurting each other. And if our friendship is durable and deep, we remain faithful through all these shortcomings, through all these broken promises. Because you're able to see and make a horizon within which the good within each other triumphs. And that is fidelity. In Marcel's thought, fidelity is very important. And by infidelity to a fellow human being, I become aware of the presence of a thou who is absolute. Absolute means fullness, overflowing, so great I cannot conceive it. But I am aware of its presence from a distance, so to speak, but really present anyhow. Marcel says, the cement which binds us together. We are faithful to each other because in our fragility there is an absolute thou who in his presence binds us together like cement. He's the one who cements us. Cement is a word which Marcel uses. And this absolute thou is the ground of our hope. Our temptations to despair have most often to do with our relations with other people. The people we love die, or the example which Marcel gives, a father has a son who's gone to the wars and no word has been heard from the son. Is he missing in action? Did he die, or was he taken prisoner? No word is received, and the father is tempted to despair. But he has hope because of the presence of the absolute thou. I shall, according to my watch, to my clock, there is 15 minutes more, so I shall try to give a more or less compressed version of what should be a longer meditation. If I am faithful or trying to be faithful to a friend, and if a friend is trying to be faithful to me, well, Marcel says I can experience my friend as immortal. To love somebody, Marcel says, is to be able to say, you at least will not die. And not because I am a spoiled child who does not want to accept death, but because having been faithful or having tried one's best to be faithful to a fellow human being, the goodness and the depth and the reality of that fellow human being has been experienced by one, and one is aware that that goodness cannot simply be destroyed. And so one faces the death of that fellow human being, but is aware that the death simply is not the last word. And so to love one means to be able to say, not as a spoiled child refusing to accept reality, but as a human being who is faithful to the reality he has experienced. As a human being faithful to the reality he has experienced, he can say to his friend, you at least will not die. Why does he say at least? Because he has not experienced everybody, but he has experienced at least this one person, and he is aware that this one person is immortal. But he says at least because then he suspects perhaps everybody is like that too. I have not experienced everybody, but from my consciousness of this human person, I am able to suspect that other human persons are also immortal, also cannot die. And so part of being faithful to a fellow human being is the refusal to yield to the temptation to give up. The refusal to yield to the temptation to say, okay, life is really like that. That's the end of everything. But to say, I am faithful to what I have experienced. And fidelity is not something which depends on me, but to which I am called. The very goodness and the very depth and the very richness of what I have experienced calls me to be faithful to it. It is a call, which if I do not answer, I am unfaithful. So it's a call to be answered in fidelity. And the presence of the Absolute Thou makes me realize also that it's not only a matter of being faithful to my friend, but also to be faithful to the Absolute Thou, who is the cement which holds us together. To surrender to the temptation to say, darkness is the last word. Life has no meaning. To yield to that temptation, which we often have, and which we always have that temptation. Marcel says we always have a temptation to lose hope. To yield to that temptation is to be unfaithful to the Absolute Thou, who holds together, who is the cement which holds together the limited, finite Thou that we human beings are to each other. So then, if I am in the orientation of being, of community, of to be is to be with, I will be called to be faithful to all my fellow human beings, but since we are all limited, we are called to be faithful especially to certain human beings. There are certain human beings in our life where we are called to be faithful to them in a special way. And when we are trying our best to be faithful to these human beings, through all the disappointments, through all the shortcomings, through all the broken promises, we are able to see through it all the richness and reality of this fellow human being. And we are able to say, you at least will not die. And in that experience, we are able to be aware of the presence of an absolute thou who cements us together. And so, no matter how hopeless things seem to be, there's always this call to be faithful to one's friends and then to other human beings too, because if one is faithful to one's friends, one gets the gift of being able to realize that even the human beings who are not one's friends are also immortal, and to be faithful to the absolute thou. Now Marcel says, he makes many remarks, but I'd like to end up with three remarks. To hope, one cannot hope. One cannot hope without constantly overcoming the temptation to despair. So he says, we always have a temptation to despair. We always have a temptation to lose hope. And the act of hope always involves an overcoming of a temptation to despair. That's the first remark. The second remark is, hope is a kind of a tension between the infinite, the horizon of the infinite, and the earthly detail of the finite. For example, the father whose son has gone off to the war and from whom he has not heard anything. In the infinite horizon, he believes that he will see his son again, if not in this life, in the life to come. But in the finite life, he longs to see his son right here on earth. And hope moves in both of them. He's aware that he will see his son again in the life to come. But he longs, part of hope is to continue longing to see his son in this life, to continue looking for him, to continue praying to see him, to continue remembering to see him. In other words, Marcel's philosophy is different from the philosophy of those who would say, let's have closure now. There is no closure, but that does not mean to say that there should be a constant agony, but there is a constant hope. even in the finite, which is not, from which nothing has been heard. To continue hoping and longing to see the sun, and yet at the same time to move within the horizon that, but I do know that I shall see him again, if not in this life, then in the next. And the third thing which Marcel says is, what shall it be like when we finally enter the horizon of the absolute thou? He says, he uses two Greek words. Perhaps it will be anostos. And it's a Filipino word, pag-uwi. Pag-uwi. It's something which we Filipinos feel a lot, going home. In every Filipino language I know, there's a word for it. Umuwi in Tagalog, mapauli in Visayan, agawid in Ilocano. And I think in all the other languages there's a word for it, going home. As if going home means we have been away from it, but we have been carrying it within ourselves. And now at last we have arrived, going home. A return to the familiar, a return to where I have always been, I have always wanted to be. Nostos, a going home. At the same time, it is kainonti. It's the familiar, but experience as something new and delightful and fresh. It's something I knew, but yet so new it's almost as if it were something I had not experienced before, but yet it is something that I have experienced deeply before, and yet it's still something new and fresh and delightful. So then, we'll end up with three remarks of Marcel. One cannot hope unless one is constantly overcoming a temptation to despair. And secondly, moving within the horizon of the absolute thou, in the infinite horizon, and at the same time moving in the finite horizon of earthly fidelity to you. And finally, it's a coming, what will it be like when we enter finally into the horizon of the absolute thou? Perhaps it will be simultaneously a going home and an experiencing of something new. Just as a final remark, hope in Marcel is always faithfulness. I can hope, and I can always overcome the temptation to believe that darkness is final. That's a temptation we all have. We can always overcome it by fidelity, by faithfulness to our fellow human beings, to our friends, and faithfulness to the absolute thou, who is God. So that's as far as I can go. Are there any questions? Yes.
Can we say that by following Marcel, that we can only hope when there is no reason to hope? In other words, it does not depend on a thing, outside circumstances.
Yeah, I think he says that. Hope is not a matter, if by reason to hope you mean some logical, rational. Hope is always supra-rational. By rational, I mean something conceptualized and put in a logical order. Hope goes beyond that. I think you're right. And so in that sense, we can hope only when there is no reason to hope. But it doesn't mean to say we have to be irrational. Hope is not irrational. It's not something done only by crazy people.
Just an additional thought that do you see a similarity between Marcel phenomenology hope and the four-line description in I'm thinking of Romans chapter 5.
Hope is not hope. Hope which is seen is not hope.
No, that's in the this is Romans that it's because it sounds like a phenomenological description also that suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, character produces hope, hope does not disappoint us. You see the similarity parallel?
Yes, I see. Yes, I see a similarity, a parallel. Thank you for your question. And that's a real insight into that Marcel has something Pauline about him. Thank you for that. Is anybody? Okay, thank you for your listening. And